November 1st, 2025. Well, a lot's been going on lately, but and I guess and I'm going to hit a few things here. But first off, and I guess the title of the day here is, of course, Trump is back from his Asia tour and has brought back a lot of promises for investments uh, up to I don't know, 2 trillion, is it? I don't know, some massive investments in setting up an industry in the United States, which is an interesting deal. I mean, we're basically A, putting a tariff on them, and B, we're saying build factories over here so that, at any rate, it's working. He brought it back, and it seemed like a success. And I think certainly the trips, particularly in Japan and South Korea, I think worked out pretty good. And so all these billions will be presumably invested over here in order to create jobs in the United States. So the plan seems to be working all right as long as the Supreme Court doesn't overturn his right to impose the tariffs in the first place, in which case I don't know what happens. But one thing's for sure is the government's going to be short a lot of revenue and be deeper in debt if that happens. Um, so that's the big thing here. I think the shutdown, of course, is still ongoing, and so far we haven't seen an end of it. There is some speculation that after the election is over on November the 4th, maybe the thing will come to an end. It's a question of how far the Democrats want to take it. It doesn't look like the Republicans are budging. And of course, as I said in my last video, it is beginning to bite, if you will. So, so anyhow, we will have to keep up with that whole situation. Um, it is going to start affecting people on SNAP and so forth, as well as, of course, all these government employees and out of work, and that's not out of work, but out of pay. They're working without pay. I hear that some aren't working. I don't, unless they're actually going out and getting a alternative job, like I don't know, at McDonald's or Walmart or something. I don't know why they wouldn't be still working, because I would think it would be a bad review on them not doing it, and this is not going to go on forever. On the other hand, if they're really strapped for cash and they have to get an odd job to make up for it, well, then you can see what could be happening. At any rate, that's that, and we'll of course, one of the interesting things that happened just before he met with President Xi was this announcement that he was going to order the Department of Defense to resume nuclear testing, which is rather interesting. And of course, the downturn of the whole meeting, I think that the Chinese thing didn't come off as good as anybody would have hoped. The Chinese have held pretty firm, and although they did get 10% of the 57% tariffs reduced to 47%, in order that they're going to have a more stringent crackdown on the fentanyl. Uh, okay, and that's going to be monitored by us in some way. I guess how many deaths due to fentanyl occur month to month, and if the number starts going down, it will be considered successful. However, considering the degree to which we're blowing up boats of drug pushers coming in the ocean, I don't know that the Chinese will be the main reason the number might come down. And anyhow, so if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, or you can also follow me on Rumble because I post at both places. So that kind of leads into the next phase here. One thing I want to get into before I get into the issue that he raised about the nuclear issue. Yes, I'm back to that again, but is the issue he's now, because the shutdown, is calling on the Senate to end the filibuster, or at least I guess maybe it's another partial nuclear option. I don't presume they're talking about totally ending it. They're probably talking about just to pass continuing resolutions that keep the previous budget in place, or something like that. That sounds gets a little bit technical, and it is a slippery slope. And I looked at, this whole nuclear option thing is a disaster, and I think it's a major failure on the part of the Supreme Court and I guess the Republicans, because the first nuclear option that ever occurred was one that Harry Reid did back in 2013. Now, it had been talked about before, but they kind of backed away from doing it, and that was back in the 20 aughts, if you will. when they had gangs in the Senate, if you recall that period. Maybe you don't. But at any rate, they did, and it didn't happen. But in 2013, they went ahead and did it because apparently the Republicans were filibustering too many of Obama's appointments, and for the Democrats' satisfaction. And so they did a nuclear option saying that all appointments would be exempted from filibuster rules, and that you only have to have 50 votes to 51 votes, that is, to cut off debate. Well, except for the Supreme Court. Well, then they proceeded to load every court position in the country up with Democrats. Okay, including all the key appellate courts, including the one in D.C., which had up to that time been pretty Republican. Now it's Democrat, because Republicans had failed to actually get all the seats filled when they were in. So that's where we were. And then, of course, the Republicans got in, seeing how the courts were so rigged to the Democrats, decided, and not wanting the Democrats to filibuster our appointments, which they were doing. We went ahead and made it the same for all appointments now, including the Supreme Court. And now, of course, the Democrats, remember, when they were in the first term of Biden, were prepared to end the filibuster, to do the whole Democrat agenda. But fortunately, two people on the Democrat side, Manchin and Sinema, refused to do it. And so it didn't happen. And now the Democrats are probably glad they didn't end the filibuster, because now they're using it to do this attempt to basically blackmail us into providing $1.6 trillion in the 10-year budget for some supplements that were originally put on for basically a COVID, because of people out of work due to COVID. So anyway, that's where we are. And I think that my view is that the real thing that should have happened back in 2013 is the Republicans should have gone to the Supreme Court and argued that the first appointment that was made under these new rules, or any appointments made under them, were illegitimate and should be vacated because the Senate had broke its rules. A nuclear option means that the Senate simply ignores its rules and ignores its procedure for changing the rules, and just does it anyhow by a majority vote, and like, who can stop them? That's kind of the attitude it is. And if they'd have went to the Supreme Court, and if the Supreme Court had taken up the case and ruled that any appointment made by ignoring the rules in place was invalid. And by the way, they've done that on other cases where the executive, for instance, ignored certain rules in the law and so forth. So if they'd have done that, they'd have done two things. One, they would have stopped that, and they would also perfected themselves from being packed sometime in the future when the filibuster is completely ended. And if the Democrats get in, there's a serious fate that they'll do this. In fact, going back to the beginning, that is the beginning, actually, of my videos here. So at any rate, that's what I think about that. No, I don't think we should do that. I would rather the president just illegally spend the money than to do that. And if those Republicans have the guts to not vote to remove him from office, if the Democrats were to impeach him, then he can do it. But at any rate, I'll leave that for other people's thoughts. But now getting back to the issue that Trump raised with the nuclear testing, which I find that to be rather strange, because he said something that's rather weird, getting into the fact that, that he said he wanted to, does he mean actually testing full up yields of nuclear weapons? And we haven't done that since 1992, I think. And even then we were under what's called the threshold test ban. So I don't know what he's actually proposing to do or what the motivation is. It sounds to me like he's reacting, trying to make a tough response to the Russian announcements of their new weapons, the Berezhnik cruise missile and that Poseidon nuclear torpedo, and I guess the avant-garde maneuvering warhead also, which wasn't highlighted recently but had been previously, and apparently has now been being deployed on some of their missiles. So, I mean, the only reason I could see to do this at the present time would be for reliability testing. That is, you could ask yourself, if a nuclear warhead has been sitting out there for 30 years, will it actually detonate with a full up yield it was designed to have, or would some parts of it decay? maybe the chemical explosives around the primary or something like that. I mean, the tritium, I think, is monitored regularly anyhow, because that decays with a 12.5 year half-life, and so presumably those tritiums or capsules are removed and replaced with some that have been updated, and then they have to separate out the helium-3 from the tritium. Okay, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. But there is a nuclear weapons stewardship program that uses computer modeling and uses a variety of other techniques, examinations of the materials and any changes, and just updating things and so forth to maintain it. So, and that we're spending billions on this, and it seems like that is pretty credible. These are all proven designs, and so, and he also makes the assertion that somebody else is testing, and other than North Korea, I don't know who he's talking about, really. I mean, nobody else has tested since, I think, 98. I think that was Pakistan, and before that, 96, I think was China, maybe. So in other words, in the recent decades, the only one testing at all was North Korea, and they haven't done it for a while. And we'd sort of harassed them and beat them down to where they've kind of backed off too. Probably they have a proven design, and so they're happy. Well, at any rate, so I don't know what he's talking about other people testing recently. I don't know what that's about. But I'm sure the arms control community will be pretty upset with it. My general attitude on these three Russian developments is that they were basically created as a response to the fact that under President Bush, I think in 2001, we withdrew from the ABM treaty, and mainly the reason why that was done was to make a limited defense against North Korea, of all places, and which of course that was featured in the previous video I did and the movie that was about. So if you want to know what that is, you can just watch that House Full of Dynamite movie, and you'll see how that limited system, what it turned into after all these years. I think it's like a total of 48 interceptor missiles with hit-to-kill, kinetic kill vehicles that have a ability to intercept a limited number of warheads. Okay, but the theory of Russia being ever fearful and whatever reactive to these things was thinking, well, what if we go full scale and go to what Trump's calling the Golden Dome, which he's proposed, although that hasn't really emerged yet as a specific program. I'm sure studies are underway. But the thing about that is that, okay, so the Russians are looking, what do we do in that case? Well, for one thing, they can't afford to make a Golden Dome. I'm not even sure we can, but they can't. They definitely don't have enough money to do that. So I think what they were looking at is how to penetrate or get around these defenses. And so what they've come up with is first a maneuvering warhead that could defeat things like our ground-based interceptors if we were to deploy hundreds of them instead of just 48. The other thing that they've come up with is the Poseidon torpedo, which has a very high yield warhead in it. And the idea is to put up near the harbor of New York and create a giant tidal wave type effect, which would do great damage. And potentially that torpedo, we don't even know, it would be a very high yield warhead. It would obviously have a lot of radioactivity. Is this going to be a seeded warhead, as they say, where you put elements in it that'll create extra long-lived radioactivity? I don't know. But that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is this new Varishnik cruise missile, which is a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Apparently, it's got a small nuclear reactor. If you're familiar with the idea of nuclear thermal propulsion in spacecraft, for instance, which has been studied for years but never really deployed by anybody, where you have a nuclear reactor and then you flow the propellant through the reactor to heat it up to very high temperature, similar to what you'd get if you were combusting it, and then putting it out a nozzle at the end in order to create thrust, sort of like a jet engine. I think this one apparently travels at slower speed, so apparently it's got a turbine compressor in it also that pulls the air in. I don't think it's fast enough to be a ramjet. At least that's my understanding. But anyhow, they've been able to successfully flight test that. and it would also carry a nuclear warhead, just like our air-launched cruise missiles would. But the Tomahawks currently don't, because they got rid of those under the INF Treaty, which we now are under, but I don't think we redeployed those. So effectively, what you're talking about then is this would allow them, if they were to mass produce this stuff, would allow them to find various ways to get through a ballistic missile base defense shield by simply flying under it, or sending maneuvering vehicles that could try to dodge the interceptors. And that's essentially what the Russians are up to. But the actual destructiveness overall, except for maybe that torpedo thing, is no worse than the current arsenal they have anyhow. It's just a way to defeat any defense we might choose to make. I guess they're really worried that we're going to do that. And certainly the current administration has sort of declared that intention. So that's their response to it. And so, at any rate, that's what that's all about. The torpedo thing could be the worst of all. I mean, trying to create a tidal wave to flood the city. I mean, to make that maximum effectiveness, you would perhaps be dealing with seeded weapons, or maybe just a lot of just fission products, which would still put a lot of radioactive contamination into the cities and attack them in that way, as well as the damage that this sort of tidal wave effect would have. I'm not sure how well that would work, but I guess they've studied it out and think it would. At any rate, that's what they're proposing to deploy here, which and this leads to the kind of breakdown of arms control and good relations. The other bad thing is that they seem to be helping the North Koreans out to improve their missiles, so they would have multiple warheads and be able to penetrate the ground-based interceptor also. That's one of the many reasons why I think we should negotiate an end to the Ukraine war and try to improve relations with Russia, to try to make a deal where they don't deploy all that stuff. But anyhow, but that's what they're talking about, just for your information. So this will be it for this time. As always, I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.